Happiest Health presents literary translation as a form of creative expression.
By Deepa Bhasthi, Srinath Perur, Vanamala Viswanatha and Anil Kumar will be the moderator of this session.
Let's welcome our speakers.
Welcome you all. See, the topic for today's discussion is literary translation as a form of creative expression. So I have been reading literature in translation for the last few years, and as a reader I strongly believe the translation is an art form, and translation is also a form of writing, right? So a writer imagines and he puts it into text, right? He creates a text form for that. A translator, he reads the text which is existing and he reimagines it in a different language, and he creates it, that particular prose, in altogether a different language, aiming for people with different, probably people with different background, different set of readers. So in that sense I believe it's an art form. So I have chosen some topics in the work of translation where I believe translator has to be creative and he should come to the fore other than just being an author. It's not just copying word to word using a dictionary, let us say Kannada to Telugu. You are not going to use Kannada to Telugu dictionary and replace all the words in Kannada into Telugu. So that's what we are trying to establish in this discussion. So the first topic that I chose for this is foreignization versus domestication. In the sense that if there are two schools of thought, right? If you are translating, let's say from, again I'll come back to, because Telugu is my mother tongue, I'll talk about Kannada and Telugu. So if you are, though you are Kannada to English translators all, right? So Kannada to Telugu, if you are translating, you may, basically it's a Kannada story with a Kannada characters and Kannada names and Kannada milieu, right? There is a school of thought where they say translation has to be foreignized. It's in the sense that you have to give a sense to the reader, leaving out some Kannada terms, right? So that you make them feel that it is coming from Kannada, and you may gloss it. Certain times you may not choose to gloss it. So that is foreignization. The other way of doing it is whatever historically has been happening, when you go to older translators, older translations, everything, if you are translating it to English, everything you are going to put it in the form of English. There is no feel other than the nouns, probably, other than the names, everything you make it into English. So Srinath, I start with you. I would like each question I will ask you, I will direct with one of you, and you two have to answer. Like that we will go in a round robin fashion. So Srinath, foreignization versus domestication, and wherever it's possible, please give examples from your work or the works that you have read, right? So the first topic is foreignization versus domestication. What are your views?
Yeah, thanks Anil. And hi everyone, it's really nice to be here. So to some extent, I think any translation, some degree of foreignization is inevitable. And a lot of it is also implicit, because often we tend to think of specific words that are either translated into English or not translated and left as is. So I want to start by giving an example of something which I didn't even think about, but which turned out to be something that was actually an example of foreignization, I think. So while translating Ghachar Gochar, there's a scene in which a family sits down to have a meal. And it was fine in India. And then when it went to the United States, our editor made some changes. And that was when it struck me that any reader in India, knowing the class of those people, already knew that they were sitting on the floor to eat. But our US editor could not imagine. She had placed them at the table, and many of her changes reflected this alternate vision of what was going on in the book. So, in a way, I think all translations will have parts like this, where the culture that a book is coming from is going to be, a knowledge of that culture is going to be vital to understand what is happening in it. So it requires some amount of defamiliarization on the part of the author, I think, to know, I have to take myself out of my culture to some extent, to know that it can possibly be interpreted in a certain way. And that said, a lot of the decisions I make with respect to this are about small things like, what do you do with a particular item of food and so on. And this is not just India and outside India, it is also within India, right? So if you have happala in Kannada, am I going to make it papad? Am I going to make it papadam? Am I going to describe it? So various people have used various approaches. Or if I have saru, I tend to make it rasam. I try to use the pan-Indian word that is most commonly understood or whatever. So I think it's a case-by-case thing, and I'm honestly just winging it based on the overall effect that I'm hoping to achieve with the translation. So.
Deepa, please.
Yeah, thanks, Srinath. I think all of us are winging it a lot of the times. I second Srinath, because I think there are some words which cannot be taken out of the context, and the example that he gave. Sorry. So some of these things are inevitable, but also I differ. When he said Saru versus Rasam, for me, like he said, I think all of us have our different approaches. I would retain Saru just because I want to retain the Kannada-ness of it. But again, I think there is no right or wrong way, of course. Every
translation with accent, your favorite term.
Yes, the translation with an accent.
Yeah.
So I would retain that, of course, to bring a certain hum of the Kannada language into the translated text. But again, like with fiction or any other creative work, there is no right or wrong, or this is better or that is better at all. At the same time, I would think that food terms should never be translated because dosa is not crepes, or there was a tendency to do that at some point. But of course, it might have been okay for that generation, or that time and that time period. But I don't think we should do that anymore at all. Dosa is dosa, or idli is idli, or vade is not fried donuts, for example. So I think but I think it's also important to maintain a certain balance in how many words we retain, and how many words from the original language we don't retain. We don't also want to make it too exotic by retaining too many words from.
Then fluidity will get affected.
Fluidity from Tamil or Kannada or Telugu, whatever language. Yeah. So I think that balance is it's a very delicate balance that one needs to maintain.
True. Yeah. And the next topic is humor. Because humor, I believe it always comes with a background context, always, all the time. So how do you handle humor? That's a question for you and ma'am. Yeah. No, you start with it.
It is hard, because I think when one learns a new language, I've always believed that if you can understand the humor in a new language, then you've pretty much gotten better at it. So I suppose it's just for me at least, it's about having a certain ear for the language, whether in my case in both Kannada and in English. Some humor is lost, obviously something is lost, but then again, like I say, I don't necessarily like using the term lost in translation, because no two languages will ever be the same.
Yes.
But we should instead be looking at what we find via translations. So, a lot of writers that we have read or we will go on to read are possible only because there is a translation of that work. Marquez, we would never read Marquez, or we would never have read Tolstoy if not for translations, or from our own languages as well. So for me, it's just about having a certain ear for both the languages, I would say.
Yeah. Ma'am, sorry.
Humor is so tough to translate that often it is defined as that which is lost in translation is humor. So it's that notorious. But there are various hues and colors and shapes in which humor comes. Some of them are more easily translated. than some others. For instance, if it is, let's say, double meanings, it can happen out of situations, out of wordplay. So humor can emanate from any of these sources or cultural references. So some are harder to tackle and some are easier. For instance, in Malayagali Madhumagalu, there is the character of Kanna Pandita, a Malayalam person, a Vaidya, a native doctor, who gives out medicine. Therefore, everybody is very, respectful of him. So, but he has his own pronunciation. Where we call Gutti, he says Kutti, so K. He replaces K for G. So that's a little bit of that humor from another language person pronouncing Kannada. That's easy enough to write. Instead of G, you write K, K-U-T-T-I or T-T-H-I, okay? So that's fine. And sometimes, like what they call spoonerism, no? Like exchange this for that. That is also easy enough to handle. In another situation in the Kuvempu novel, there are these boys who are kind of talking to each other. One of them is very upset and hurt by a remark that somebody else has made. So there is among the boys, there is a kind of a little depressed kind of a mood. So it says, one shrill voice pipes up. Don't you remember what Aigulu said once? If God prays, the devotee will surely grant his wish. Right? So where it should have said this, it says that. So that kind of thing is somewhat easy to establish. Now sometimes humor can also emanate or come out of a situation where something very light and kind of despicable experience is described in very lofty language. And for this I would like to, like the word Karana Purusha, right? Kuvempu uses the word Karana Purusha. The context is this. There is a kind of a Kap Panchayat context. People of the community have come together to assess and to decide what should be the punishment for this woman who is a widow but who has got pregnant, right? So that's the situation. And if you would allow me to read a short passage, then it will establish what I'm trying to say. See, there is already a kind of an introduction to that humorous piece. A foul smell spreads faster than a pleasant fragrance, wafting faster to the nose and reaching more people faster. A good reputation takes long to spread. A bad reputation spreads like wildfire. All this is there. And then the news of Putta's widowed mother-in-law Kadi, Kadi is her name, Kadi's pregnancy has been doing the rounds, galloping on the gossip horse, etc. And then the next para begins. So the leaders of the community ruled that they would extract the fine from the man who was the cause for Kadi's condition. But they were unable to find that Karana Purusha, a divine male born to accomplish a noble mission, right? Let alone like I could have used the word prime mover or the person responsible for and so on. But Karana Purusha has this very spiritual, the origin of the world, the man, the being who has created the world and so on. Therefore, that is where the humor comes, and I had to keep that word Karana Purusha. And it goes on, let alone the leaders struggling to find the Karana Purusha, Kadi herself finds it hard to tell who might be the cause for her condition. Sometimes she would point to her son-in-law Putta, right? And sometimes she points to her neighbor who is a known romancer. And sometimes she would even point to Lakunda Sesanayaka, a respectable landlord and the best leader of the Halepeka community, so who is sitting in judgment on her. So that's how it goes on, and then ends with, so much for the community leader's voyage of discovery. The ship had lost its way in the middle of the ocean, not able to sight the pole star, nor able to work its ruined compass. Okay? So in a way, it is situational, it is linguistic, and it is the whole aspect of it. So this is really hard to recreate unless you use, do some kind of an acrobatics with all the language, the situation, the characters, and things like that. So there are many places where the humor is in the situation itself. There is a very famous scene in Kuvempu's novel. It is called the Bicycle Savari. Like the bicycle, this Western import, has just made its first appearance in this village, and nobody has ever seen one. So they don't even know the word. The word itself is foreign. So instead of saying bicycle, they call it bicycle, because bicycle, your chakki, is a well-known word for them. And they keep wondering, but how is it in our chakki, in our bicycle, one kallu is on top of the other. Here I believe it is next to each other. How does it work? So this sense of wonder, this sense of complete marvel, and so on. And then Kuvempu describes one of the characters, saying, hey, let me also touch it once, let me also touch it once. So they make some space for this character called Aita. And Aita has just been married. All he can think of is his wife and her body. So Kuvempu describes his touch. Like he touched it as though he was touching his wife's body that first night, etc., etc. And then the whole description is like that. So, as I said, humor comes into play in various ways in the text. And one has to just kind of try and catch that.
You have to be really creative, I believe. Humor is the toughest, I guess.
So I wouldn't say humor is lost in translation. I would say humor is done differently in the translated text. Yeah.
And the next one is culture-specific terms. That is for you. And especially as translators.
Can I add something to the humor discussion, please? Yeah, I was just thinking when I was hearing both of you about one of my favorite translations as a body, which is the Asterix comics. And for a long time when I read them, I didn't even realize that they're translated into English. And it turns out that a lot of the humor was introduced in the translation because it was funny in French. And it had, a lot of it was very culture specific. And the translator's mandate here was to be funny. So many of the jokes were simply made up. And I've always found that inspiring. And because many of the things are translated, which is not that many anyway, but most of it has been with living authors, I found it really useful to work with them. And if, the humor is not working, from the original to English, then to probably work with them and create something that is, because the intent is to have something funny in that place, because with literary fiction you're working, you're controlling the ebb and flow of your book in certain ways. So I found that very useful with humor. If, an author is living and willing to sit with the translator, I think some more things can be accomplished.
The next question is for you. Next topic is culture-specific terms. Mm-hmm. And I believe when it is getting, let us say, our South Indian languages, when it is coming from one South Indian language to the other, probably it is slightly easier. For example, puja, right? You say puja, when it gets translated into Telugu, you don't need any explanation for that. But if it is going to a Western audience in English or in German or French, especially great writers from this part of the world, South Indian writers, they're really great writers who their writing is very, very rooted in culture, right? So I believe that when it gets to cultures which are, thousands of kilometers apart, as English translators, I think it is very difficult to handle these culture-specific terms. So give some examples and how did you handle them?
When my girl was young, just then Folk Tales from India, edited by A.K. Ramanujan, translated and edited, that book had come out. And I started reading a couple of stories to her. And she didn't know it was Folk Tales from India and so on. She was still very small. She said, oh, they are such Indian stories, she said. So in English, to hear those Indian stories was strange for her because she was used to either Kannada stories or English stories. So she says these stories are in English, but they're so Indian. So what she meant by that was, I think kinship terms, social relation terms are very important for in Indian texts because it is important in the Indian context. So no character addresses another character without saying akka or anna or ayya or swami or one of those relational terms. And more so in a hierarchical society, where especially a text like this, which has to do with so many classes and castes of people, there is no question of addressing anybody without indicating that relationship. Now, do we have that in English? No. It is there in other ways, which we can't use. You can't use a word like sir, for instance. It comes from a very different register of English, and so it doesn't go with the rural, very local kind of a novel like this. Therefore, you have to find some way of doing it. And I found that ayya is a term of like that, which is very versatile. Father can also be called ayya in some communities. And ayya is an elder. Ayya can also be a Brahmin, right? So many of these terms. So I found that keeping some of these terms, and in earlier works I had kind of given a glossary at the end. What does ayya mean? And so on. So that people who needed to know, find out what it is, they could always look up the glossary at the end. It is unobtrusively, it is there. It's for you to find out if you want to find out. So like that, that is one aspect of it. Another aspect is when you're referring to fauna and flora, many of the plants and species are only found, let's say, in the Western Ghats in this region, and it's not found elsewhere. And so how do we represent those plants and trees and flowers and fruits, right? You can't sort of give the approximate near kind of a thing because you're talking about a different species. And it's very important to record and document these differences. And therefore I have retained, it took a lot of research to find out what is the common name for all these plants and animals, and if it's common enough across the globe or is it something specific to the region. All that homework, translation, it does involve a lot of research. That is one thing I would say. And there are terms, for instance, for all the, because it's that kind of climate, there is a platform, there is a juggly, and there is a place where you have to leave your shoes because it's we're all familiar today. It's Malnad weather. So, like half wet clothes, what do you do, all of that. So, everything has a different name and a different function. So, then what do you do? So, very often one tries to build in the explanation within the text. And because a writer like Kuvempu, what he was writing about his particular region, in many places he has himself explained it in the text. Therefore, I didn't have to do that explanation.
You didn't have to do glossary.
Yeah, I didn't have to. So I just translated what he had written, especially about community names and so on. Now, for instance, he uses the word Hale Paika. And in the bracket, he writes, this community also goes by the name of Deevaru. So, Tevar, that word, yeah. So, like that. So, there are, so it's built in, So, that takes me forward in the narrative without any break. So, that's how one has come around culture-specific terms.
Your experience in the same topic.
Yeah, no,
And I have one more question for you related to this. Would you like to gloss it within the text so that fluidity of reading won't affect, or would you like to add it at the end of the story? Which approach you would like to take?
At the end of the story, did you
Yeah,
say?
glossing, I mean, when culture-specific terms is the first part. The
so
second
there's-
part is, what is your
Yeah, so with time, I think all these strategies have been changing, right? I mean, there was a time when people, translators would specifically add a glossary. And then at some stage, what happened was that the more common things you could look up on the internet, perhaps,
Right.
even if they're culture specific. So with that, the pressure on that glossary is a little less now.
Right.
Although if it is again highly localized, as Vanamala was talking about,
Yeah.
you may not have that much luck with the internet either, so you may actually need a glossary.
Right.
So I think it is really a strategy that depends upon which text you're dealing with, what the audience is going to be, and also what is happening within. So Vanamala was talking about how people refer to each other in India. So I think one problem that all translators encounter is the plural, because when we talk respectfully to someone, we
Yes,
address them in the
plural and
plural.
singular, right,
And
right.
when
In
you're
English, you
familiar,
don't have it.
it's singular.
Everything is you.
Yeah.
Right.
So I often have to decide, is it significant in this case?
Right.
In which case I will have an inline clause and say, he said respectfully in the plural or something. But if it is not really germane, and if
Right.
it is only going to get in the way of, the action, if it is a fast-paced scene, and I don't want to deal with this aspect at all, then I take a call and I don't really do that. So it's very case dependent for me at least.
But the same thing, that plural thing, plural and singular, when a person is doing it from English to Telugu translator has to be very specific. In English, nuvu meeru, it has a significant role in deciding the hierarchy or class or whatever it is. Yeah.
But I really like how in informal Indian English we solve these problems. In school, has the teacher come? No, they are coming soon, we would say.
Yes.
I mean, you would convert the plural into English. But maybe that would be too specific a translation. It would work only for people from that culture, I guess, which kind of undercuts the point of translation somewhere.
Next one is my favorite, pun and wordplay. Question starts with you and then you two have to answer. Pun and wordplay, I believe the difficulty is, it is very specific to the language, especially the wordplay. So how do you handle it? What are your views and any examples from your translations?
If it's important to the text, I have tended to make up stuff.
Right.
And partly I'm able to do that because at least the two novels I have translated by Vivek Shanbag, I know him and he reads the English translation. So if I've overstepped or, done something that is contrary to the spirit of the book, he can point it out.
Yeah.
So if there is something of the sort, that is what I end up doing. And actually sometimes trying to retain it also feels a bit desperate. And so in Ghachar Gucha, there was something that I was quite happy about when I came up with it. There was this idiom that went kasige takka kajjaya, and I struggled a lot and came up with some cakes as good as the coins they cost, and I was quite proud that I retained the alliteration on the k sound and all that. But now thinking back, I'm wondering if it was worth it, and maybe it wouldn't have made a difference if I had either substituted with something else or so I think it's all very case dependent, I think.
Same,
Yeah,
pun and wordplay,
the same thing. I think it's very, very case dependent because sometimes, I'm just agreeing with everything Srinath says because he said it all. So in some places, I think it makes sense to change it entirely because in a lot of South Indian languages we have echo words, ante kante, things like that. Where I think there is it's called some fixed echo simulation, something in linguistics like that. So it has a beautiful musicality when we say that in Kannada or Telugu or something. And these things are very hard. You can't, ante kante itself, how would you translate that into English? So I think it really depends on how important these words are in the text, whether they are just integral to the story that is happening, and then obviously we make some kind of choices and either invent some new terms for it, or we just kind of stick to one word. It's really, I would say it's a very case-to-case basis that one looks into.
But when it comes to pre-modern works, where Shleshe is an established literary trope, Shleshalankara they call it, it's one of the Alankaras. And a whole stanza or a unit is built on that kind of a principle. So if you don't want, you have to find a way of doing it. And in terms of, you can't leave it out, nor can you completely satisfactorily do it. So there are many different people have taken very different approaches to how to translate puns. For instance, Kumuda is a kind of a night lily, let's say Naidile Kumuda. Then Kumuda is bad pleasure or not such a good pleasure. Kumuda. So many such things are there. So I gave both meanings, in the translation. I don't have an example here, but by giving both meanings, you are kind of drawing their attention to the play of words, which is what matters. It doesn't matter that you have arrived at the best solution, but you're drawing the attention of the readers to say that here is a word play. So come along, play with it, and be part of this play. So that itself is a good enough, I think, gesturing.
Indication to the reader.
Yeah, gesturing to the readers, yes.
And the other one is poetry in prose. A lot of writers, they keep writing poetry and metaphorically, they allude it to the characters and the way the story is getting along. And poetry, the one more difficulty is you have a meter, you have a rhythm to the poetry. So same one-to-word translation, if you do into English or whatever, the entire meaning may be lost, or it may look really odd. So how do you handle poetry in prose?
I don't have the guts to translate poetry, honestly. I've been very lucky
No,
that...
I mean to say, you are translating a novel, prose, and in between, in some passages there is a poetry. That's what I mean. Not a poetry translation.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, because I think poetry is so musical. Usually
Yes.
there is a certain musicality to poetry that is not so much present in the prose, and that is always difficult. So I think one needs to look for, try and achieve a kind of alliteration in the translated version as well, so that sort of, so that when you read it aloud, there is a certain sing-song quality to the sentence. But otherwise, yeah, again, I think I would say I would stick to the alliterative part and try to bring in as many, a certain musicality to it. I think that's the only thing. I can't think of an example because I haven't, in the works that I have translated, I have not had to deal with this. So that's a problem I still haven't thankfully encountered.
No, ma'am.
I can only illustrate what I want to say.
Can you say that in Kannada, please, and then
that's what,
few lines, and English too. Yeah. And explain us the process of translation. Yeah.
See, Kuempu is describing the rain of Malnad. So he's saying how it rains, what a downpour, unrelenting, etc., all that. And then he is also saying what is happening to the lives of the people. So in the same page, there are two different registers, two different styles. One is a high mimetic, high register, very Sanskritic in the description and so on. The other is absolutely the spoken idiom kind of thing. In both these places, there is poetry. So poetry functions in one way, because in the first one, and just listen to this. Yaru badukali, yaru sayali, yaru huttali, huttade hogali, ಮಳೆಗಾಲ ನಿಲ್ಲುತ್ತದೆಯೇ? ಮಳೆ ಹಿಡಿದು ಕೂತಿತ್ತು, 4 ಪಾದಗಳನ್ನು ಬಲವಾಗಿ ಊರಿ. ಮೋಡ ಸದಾ ಕವಿದು ಸೂರ್ಯದರ್ಶನವೇ ಅಪೂರ್ವವಾಯಿತು. ತನ್ನ ದುರ್ದಮ್ಯ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರಗಳನ್ನು ನಿರ್ಲಕ್ಷ್ಯವಾಗಿ ನಿರ್ದಾಕ್ಷಿಣ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಸಾಗಿಸಿತ್ತು ಬೃಹತ್ ಪ್ರಕೃತಿ. ಆ ಪ್ರಕೃತಿಯ ಪ್ರತಿರೂಪಾದ ಸಹ್ಯಾದ್ರಿ ಪರ್ವತ ಕಾನನ ಶ್ರೇಣಿ ಮನುಷ್ಯರ ಅಲ್ಪ ಸುಖ ದುಃಖಗಳಿಗೆ ಸಂಪೂರ್ಣ ನಿಸ್ಸಂಗಿಯಾಗಿ ಭೀಷಣ ವರ್ಷಧಾರೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ತೊಪ್ಪನೆ ತೋಯುತ್ತಾ ಹಬ್ಬಿ ಕೊಬ್ಬಿ ಉಬ್ಬಿ ನಿಂತಿತ್ತು. ಸೊ That is one kind of register. And then continuing that, Sahyadri. How does Sahyadri care? What does Sahyadri care for the travails of the ordinary people? ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇವೆಲ್ಲ ಒಳತೋಟಿಗಳು ಆ ಸಹ್ಯಾದ್ರಿಯ ಮಲೆ, ಕಾಡು, ಮಳೆ ಇವುಗಳ ಕಡೆಗಣ್ಣಿನ ಗಮನಕ್ಕಾದರೂ ಬರುತ್ತದೆಯೇ? ಮಲೆಯೋ ಅಲೆ ಅಲೆ ಅಲೆಯಾಗಿ ಬಾನ್ಮುಟ್ಟಿ ತಲೆ ಎತ್ತಿ ನಿಂತಿದೆ. ಕಾಡೋ ದಿಗಂತ ವಿಶ್ರಾಂತವಾಗಿ ದಟ್ಟವಾಗಿ ವ್ಯಾಘ್ರಭೀಷಣವಾಗಿ ವರಾಹ ಕಠೋರವಾಗಿ ಹಸಿರಿಸಿದೆ. ಮಳೆಯೋ ಹಗಲು ಇರುಳು ಒಂದೇ ಸಮನೆ ಸುರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ, ಹೊಡೆಯುತ್ತಿದೆ, ಜಡಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ. See, so much poetry there is. So, that is one kind of a register in which he... yeah. All right. So, I'll just read a few parts of that. What does the rainy season care? Who is alive or who is dead? Who is born or who isn't? The rain is here to stay, digging in all its four paws. With skies overcast, the sun is a rare visitor. Great nature conducts its irrepressible transactions with total unconcern and apathy. A mirror image of that nature, the forest ranges of the Sahyadri mountains, utterly impervious to the trivial joys and sorrows of human beings, stand there, immense, impudent, and imperious, nonchalantly soaking in the horrendous torrent. And later it says, the Sahyadri ranges, the serrated mountain, how it looms defiant, its head raised to pierce the sky, the imposing green forest, how it stretches across the vast expanse, terrifying as a tiger and brutal as a boar. The precipitous rain, how it pounds the earth, beating down, bearing down mercilessly, night and day. Right? So you use very Latinate expressions as a kind of a parallel to his Sanskritic, highly Sanskritized words. But a little, a paragraph later, he is describing people, like there has been a death in the village. It's a very strange kind of death. The husband has died and he is about to be cremated. The wife approaches the pyre and she is supposed to just do the namaskaram to the dead body. She bows down and just doesn't get up. And then people realize she has also died along with her husband. And it is such an unusual, strange incident that people couldn't stop talking about it. So that is what he is describing here. ಹಳೆ ಮನೆ, that's the ಮನೆಯವರ ಮನೆತನದ ಹೆಸರು. ಹಳೆ ಮನೆಯ ದುರಂತ ಸಂಭವಿಸಿದ ತರುಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಇಬ್ಬರೂ ಸಂಧಿಸಿದರೂ ಮೊದಲಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತು ಮೊದಲಾಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದುದು ಒಂದೇ ವಿಷಯದಿಂದ. ತಿರುಪತಿಗೆ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದು ಹಿಂತಿರುಗಿದ್ದ ಹಳೆ ಮನೆ ದೊಡ್ಡಣ್ಣ ಹೆಗ್ಗಡೆಯವರು ಕಾಲವಾದ ಕಥೆ ಮತ್ತು ಅವರ ಹೆಂಡತಿ ರಂಗಮ್ಮ ಅವರ ಇಚ್ಛಾಮರಣದ ಸುದ್ದಿ. ಅಳುತ್ತಾ ಮಾತನಾಡಿದರು, ನಗುತ್ತಾ ಮಾತಾಡಿದರು, ಉಳುತ್ತಾ ಮಾತಾಡಿದರು, ಅಂಚುಕೆತ್ತುತ್ತಾ ಮಾತಾಡಿದರು, ಬಾಯಿಗೆ ಹಾಕಿಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತಾ ಮಾತಾಡಿದರು, ಎಲೆ ಅಡಿಕೆ ಜಗಿಯುತ್ತಾ ಮಾತಾಡಿದರು, ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಕೆಲಸಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗುತ್ತಾ ಮಾತಾಡಿದರು, ಬೈಗಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮನೆಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತಾ ಮಾತಾಡಿದರು. ಎಷ್ಟು ಮಾತಾಡಿದರೂ ಸಾಲದ ಸುದ್ದಿ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಮೆಚ್ಚಿ ನೋಡಿದರೂ ತೀರದ ಸುದ್ದಿ. ಕರುಣ, ಅದ್ಭುತ, ಶಾಂತರಸಗಳಿಗೆ ಅಕ್ಷಯ ಪಾತ್ರೆಯಾಗಿ ಪವಿತ್ರ ತೀರ್ಥವಾರ್ತೆಯಾಗಿತ್ತು ಆ ಸುದ್ದಿ ಅಂತ ಎಷ್ಟು ಒಂಥರ ಆಡು ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ವೆರಿ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಲೈಟ್ ಇನ್ ಅ ವೇ ಇನ್ ವಿಚ್ ಹಿ ಈಸ್ ಟಾಕಿಂಗ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ದಿಸ್. ಸೊ ಒನ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಟು suddenly shift gears and use a very different kind of set of words, way of narrating it. So in the English, this is how I tried to say it. They talked about it crying and laughing. They talked about it while sewing and digging the beds and readying the buns. They talked about it throwing tobacco into their mouths and chewing betel leaf and nut. They talked about it on their way to work at dawn, They talked about it on the way back home at dusk. They could not have enough of it. They could not stop talking about it. The news, a never-depleting vessel filled with the rasa of compassion, wonderment and tranquility, turned into a perennial source of holy water.
All are simple words.
Yeah.
That's what, yeah. Okay. Now, the next topic is voice, especially in big translations like 500 pages, 400 pages, so many characters in Kuvempu's novels, and any, for that matter, any novel, so many characters, and most of the times each character has its distinct voice. So, take us through that. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say the toughest thing to reproduce in a translation is voice. Because you have to establish, you have to get into the skin, under the skin of the character, to think and feel and sound like that character. And this has come home to me in a very strong kind of a way, a very unexpected way. I, perhaps foolishly, have agreed to do an audio book of this book. This 800-page book I want to read. And I have started reading and recording it in a studio. And in doing it, now I'm forced to do the voices. At least not very dramatic, but at least to some extent. Then I realize, the problem has come home to me like that. Okay? So, how different are they? When two people are talking, how do you establish that they are different? So, this, in most cases, it's already happened in the text. Therefore, this experience of recording has brought it home afresh to me. And one, as I said, is to use the kinship terms, aya or e gutti, he can say. But he can't say e kanna pandita, right? So, those kinds of things. And, the tone itself is very different, and therefore, hesitation in the voice, putting a few dots here to indicate that he's trying to be, begging, etc., etc. So, voice is the toughest thing to do because in so many ways, even between husband and wife, where it is not such a hierarchical, it is still hierarchical, but it's not hierarchical in the same way, there's also intimacy. So, how do you shift from a normal conversation to a slightly intimate conversation? Or how do you make Aita sound repentant, in the language? So this morning, Professor Sarukai, who was talking about this book, talked about a sensorium, of sounds and smells and tastes. That's what a translation has to create. And so voice is very much a part of that experience. And you have to establish the uniqueness of each voice. And therefore, it is difficult. But it's difficult even for the writer. It's not just a translator's difficulty. And so wherever Kuvempu himself has introduced it, like for instance, Kutti, as I said, or, I remember, like Deepa using Re, for instance, in the conversations, etc. So, it is there, you can use it. But it is the tonalities that is hard to bring it out. So, partly it has to do with your diction. Which, do you use a very formal, distant one, or a slightly more endearing, intimate kind of a tone? Secondly, what Srinath was saying about using a certain slightly explanatory word. He said apologetically, or he said sheepishly, or so this ly adjectival is a great support for translators. What you can't get directly in the tonality, in the dialogue itself, you add an adjectival description to indicate what's the tone, sometimes. So that also might help. I'm sure you have other...
Srinath, your views on voice.
Yeah, no, I think she captured it very well. I think this is the aspect where I think the translator is basically becoming the writer to some extent. And as she said, acting is perhaps the, the craft that most closely approaches it. I still remember how when I started doing Ghachar Gochar, it was the first time I'd ever translated. And the way I got into it was that the first few pages, I kept doing it, and then I kept hitting a block where my voice was not able to carry on with the book. And so I kept doing the first few pages again and again. And this is an abstract thing. Because it is not just about, it is about the choice of words, their relationship. It is also about what is in between the words and sentences. It's a very abstract thing which I think is not really evident even to the person doing the writing. So I kept doing it again and again until I thought I had a supple enough voice that could just go through the book. And that was when it became easy to write it down after that. So I felt I had got that. It's like I was set on a rail, and then I could just make progress through the book. But this was also, I think, a very different book from that one. It was just one narrator. So as long as I was able to capture his psychology, I think the book would go on.
Yeah.
This is, of course, a significantly more monumental challenge.
So you mean first-person narratives are slightly easier to handle as far as voice is concerned?
I don't know about easier, but probably the amount of work you do is different, because once you crack that narrator, I think a lot of it falls into place.
And the other one is another interesting style of the writer, right? Especially there are some Western writers, European writers too. For example, there is a lot of repetition in certain phrases that they use. But as far as Western, in the sense that American writing, or even for that matter, our South Indian writing, we don't try to use repetition as much, right? That is one example. Other than that, certain writers, they use long sentences. And I believe, especially Telugu, it is not very easy to construct long sentences, right? In English, they have flexibility where they keep on adding clauses and keep long sentences. So as far as the style is concerned, writer style is concerned, to an extent, I believe it is also important to convey the style of writing. So your views on that. Yeah. This is open to all three. You can all three answer it. Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Yeah. You please start with that. This is the final question. Yeah.
Yeah. With terms of repeating words, I have found that there is more tolerance for repeating words in Indian languages generally. Whereas if you're writing in English, editors are hawk-eyed about picking out any repetition, within a few paragraphs of each other. If a non-trivial word has been repeated, it gets replaced with the synonym, which is also an annoying tick, but it's there. It's a convention. And there seems to be a more relaxed attitude to how things are said, what in English would be called tightness of some sort. I think when I read Kannada, I find it more loose compared to how the style of English fiction or whatever. And I've often wondered why this is. Maybe it is because of an influence of oral traditions, where things are intentionally repeated so that, a large live audience does not miss part of the story that is being told and so on. And all those traditions do come into literature as well. So it's not very clear to me why these things happen, but I am conscious that the reader I'm writing for is someone who's used to reading in a certain way. And there is a certain, once people have read, say, 100 Kannada books, their expectations of a translation from Kannada to English also start changing. So it depends on where in the translation, trajectory you are. That is, the first book from Korean to English might have had to do certain things, for example, with Japanese manga, this is most evident, because you turn the pages the other way in Japanese. And when it was first translated to English, they thought this would be too much of a, stretch for people reading in English. So let's flip all the images and have them turn it in the conventional way. But now, once people have read a lot of them, they've gone back to doing it as it is done in Japanese, and it is considered more authentic. And with style, maybe one last thing I'd like to add is about poetry, which we were talking about some time back. Very recently, I was looking at B.M. Srikantaya's English Geetegalu, which is considered a landmark work of collection of poetry in Kannada. So he translated a lot of English poems into Kannada, And to do it, he developed a different style. So there was a convention of using rhyme in a certain way, which he broke. There was meter, which he expressed in a different way in his work. And it actually revolutionized Kannada poetry after that, which of course has a deep tradition and has the strength to absorb these changes. I think it's one of the things that, one of the powers of translation, that it has the power to vitalize the tradition that it is received into.
Absolutely. Deepa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both can answer. Yeah, you go ahead, Deepa, you go ahead, then we'll go.
I shall say the last word.
Okay. Sure. We run out of time. No, I think it's very important to retain the writer's style, because that's one of the things. One is that one is translating a work, but one is also translating a particular writer's work who has, over maybe the years or decades, developed a certain style. And I think, again, how much of that, with the works that I have translated, I haven't had that much of a problem. Because with works like Kuvempu, who had a very distinct style, and the Kannada was very different. It was highly Sanskritized, it was highly musical. So I think the challenge is far more, that it's a far more monumental challenge, like Srinath said. But at the same time...
what about Karanth? You have done Karanth, right?
Karanth also, yes, he had a particular style. I think what helps me is to look at, to read a lot of the other works by a same writer that I'm translating. Karanth that way was a lot more conventional in his sentence structures, whereas when it came to Banu, she uses a lot of styles of the oral style of storytelling. So sentences might trail off, or there is a change in tense right in the middle of the sentence. So my choice was to retain all these things so that the voice is carried. So these are not perfectly constructed sentences. So like I said, the tenses change, or there is a lot of trailing off that happens, or there is a sudden shift in the story from one thought to the other. So that is how we speak generally when we talk. Very few of us will talk in perfect sentences when we're having, let's say, a casual conversation, right? So that was her style of storytelling, which I tried to retain as much as possible. And that was a challenge with the editors, because it was not a very common style of translating a text. But yeah, I think it was important for me to retain that voice, because that's one of the reasons why we translate, right? We also want to convey the same reading experience from one language to the other.
Ma'am, your last word.
I have often been ambushed by people, who tell me with satanic glee on their faces, "Idin translate ಮಾಡಿ ನೋಡೋಣ, ನೀನು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಅಪ್ಪನಿಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟನೆಯ ಮಗ?" ಇದನ್ನು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಿಗೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತಾರೆ. ಎಷ್ಟನೆಯ?
Can you please translate it for me?
ಅಯ್ಯೋ, that's the point. There's no word in English for ಎಷ್ಟನೆಯ. What rank do you occupy in your family, among the siblings? That's the question. Okay? So I just want to say one word, one line. Translation is the art of the possible, and we are all here examples of, who have illustrated that. We have illustrated through our work that it is the art of the possible and not the art of the impossible, as it's often made it out to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. Thanks a lot.